your soundproof privacy booth. I can only wonder if more investigations will start based on your fast-tracking a new Superfund site at the behest of a conservative media personality and other reports that EPA has taken quick actions to help political donors and lobbyists. One investigation has already been completed, one I personally requested. The GAO found that you broke the law by hiding taxpayer spending on the privacy booth. I have a lot of questions for you today on this topic because 1 month later, you haven't followed the law by reporting to Congress or the President, your boss, how you let this happen and how you plan to fix it. And now you haven't submitted to this committee the statutorily required reports on all your other office spending as we sit here today trying to get to the bottom of your reckless spending. I'm announcing this morning that I just requested a new GAO investigation, this one to determine if EPA violated the appropriations law banning taxpayer spending on publicity and propaganda by engaging in political speech via social media. The Office of Special Counsel is also examining whether EPA's April 13th tweet violated the Hatch Act, which governs the ethics of political speech by public employees. These two investigations into EPA's single tweet encapsulate a running theme: your disregard for ethics and your disregard for taxpayer dollars. Administrator Pruitt, I'm tempted to say your scandals are a mere sideshow distracting us from the long-lasting devastation your leadership is making on human health and the environment. Indeed, while your scandals splash from front pages and clog up digital media, you've been hard at work dismantling scores of important protections. You've taken steps to roll back clean air and clean water protections, walked away from our historic global commitment to reduce the impacts of climate change. You've even managed to distort and unravel toxics reform, which was recently enacted on a bipartisan basis. Several of your attempts to halt progress on these and other public health efforts have been rejected by the courts for violating basic legal requirements for altering existing standards, requirements that you should be familiar with after decades of losing lawsuits against the EPA before you took its helm. But ultimately, Administrator Pruitt, I just can't separate your scandals from these shameless efforts to dismantle EPA. They are one and the same. Both your scandals and your policy decisions abuse your position of public trust and make a mockery of your responsibilities as head of EPA. You show the same disregard for our ethical standards and fiscal controls as you show for the air we breathe and the water we drink. Using your office to enrich yourself and your friends at the expense of the American taxpayer and the public health is a disgrace. The fiscal year 2019 budget proposal is yet another giant blinking sign that you don't take your responsibility to this country seriously. The budget proposes to slash EPA's research programs in half, gutting the ability of the agency to identify threats to public health and the environment, as well as solutions to those threats. The request also cuts nearly 50% of funds sent directly to the states. For example, the budget proposes to eliminate state funding for radon poisoning prevention, childhood lead poisoning prevention, hazardous waste disposal, and even drinking water monitoring. This isn't cooperative federalism, it's flat-out abandonment. The request proposes to cut off our multi-year effort to support independent monitoring of the contaminated water still flowing from the Gold King mine into areas of New Mexico and the Navajo Nation. The $4 million program is barely more than you are reported spending on your security detail. And your promises in this very room a year ago to make sure the Navajo and others harmed by the Gold King mine spill are properly compensated have fallen completely flat. Not one payment has been made. The budget also proposes to give polluters a pass by cutting criminal and civil enforcement by a quarter. The budget backs off entirely from virtually all climate programs, including voluntary coordination, international partnerships, and basic monitoring. I'm not surprised to see that you even propose to cut EPA's Inspector General by 10%. I suppose slowing down their work might sound appealing. Administrator Pruitt, the budget request before us today is dead on arrival because it would pull out the rug from underneath every single state in our country and decimate critical public health and environmental programs. This budget request is also dead on arrival because it is completely tone deaf to reality. This bipartisan Congress has maintained steady funding for EPA for the last 2 years running, and even boosted water infrastructure investments and lead reduction programs, despite the administration's draconian proposals to shrink the agency into oblivion. So I'm not worried about this. I'm not worried that this Congress will accept drastic cuts to EPA's operating budget or that we are going to cut off support that we send to the states. What I am worried about, Administrator Pruitt, is that you have been treating your position of public trust as a golden ticket for extravagant travel and fine dining, and as a platform to cozy up to media personalities, political donors, and polluters. I'm worried you are spending all your time enriching yourself and your friends while betraying your mission to protect human health and the environment. I look forward to our discussion today. Glad to see that Senator Leahy has joined us, the ranking member on our Appropriations Committee, and thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Udall. Senator Leahy, as the ranking member of the full committee, you're certainly welcome to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the courtesy, and I appreciate what Senator Udall said. And as you know, Senator Shelby and I have now issued a joint statement. We're trying very much to bring the Appropriations Committee back to what both of you have known it in the past, and we've issued a schedule now of markups so we can finish every one of these bills marked up in the committee by the end of June. And this is obviously an important hearing to review the budget. I have to agree with what Senator Udall said when I came in about this being a reckless and an unrealistic budget. But I think what it does is shows total contempt by you, Administrator, and the administration for bedrock environmental safeguards and for the work of EPA and the people in there, nonpartisan, hardworking people, to monitor, protect, and conserve our environment and the health of all Americans. If you attack the core mission and the role of EPA, you attack human health. The work of the EPA is essential to ensuring that air and water are clean, our land, our treasured resources, our health are protected from pollutants, toxic chemicals, the effects of climate change. Administrator, I hear constantly from Vermonters, Republicans, and Democrats alike about a seemingly endless stream of controversies at the EPA. It's troubling enough that your personal fundamental mission seems to be undermining the very mission of the agency you were appointed to lead. But the embarrassments these scandals have brought continue as does a pattern of putting personal and special interests ahead of the well-being of the American people. Your toxic agenda makes the United States more polluted and less safe, has extended beyond environmental policy, and actually affected the confidence the American people should have in their government. I think of Vermonters in places like Bennington, Vermont, when they've seen a problem with toxic water. Now, they find that you have sought to block the publication of a public health study on a class of toxic chemicals that threaten water supplies around the country, including in Bennington. That's unconscionable. How does it be a parent of a child and waiting for that report and find that you blocked it? And it's incomprehensible to the people in Bennington and Vermont why an agency that works for them, whose charge is to protect their health, turns their back on them and tries to hide health dangers. You've been given a lot of credit for cutting regulations, but the more we study your work to circumvent the law and overturn and delay regulations, we find you're causing far more uncertainty for these industries. With countless lawsuits that cost the taxpayers dollars and impede critical environmental work, you claim that rolling back or delaying what you've called costly regulations could save Americans $1 billion. But if you remove protections for public health and the environment, you're costing the American people far more each year in near and long-term health costs. Let's extrapolate the course you set for the EPA. You flipped the mission of the Environmental Protection Agency on its head. Instead of the people, by insinuating an anti-science agenda into the vital work of your science-based agency, by working to eviscerate the very marrow of the EPA, the American people are the ones that end up paying the bills with their health, with their wallets, for some with their lives and their children's lives. The mission of the EPA is simple. It's to protect human health and the environment, not to protect industry friends or to give friends from Oklahoma tens of thousands of dollars in pay raises in defiance of the White House, not to put polluters first, or to travel first class around the world. Incidentally, a Vermonter said, what a silly reason you had to fly first class because of a danger to you unless you flew first class. He said, nobody even know who you are. And you go in there, oh, somebody might criticize you. You've got security people that we've never seen before, but you have to fly first class. Oh, come on. Or to use your public office for private gain. It's an ego run amok. And certainly, your job is not to weaken and unravel our bedrock environmental laws that were put in place by both Republicans and Democrats alike. Now, you come before the committee with an indefensible budget proposal. You're trailing a string of ethical lapses and controversies that are an embarrassment to the agency and an embarrassment to Republicans and Democrats alike. We want and deserve environmental protections that work, not moneyed interests buying off those willing to sell the public health to the highest bidder. Let's have something that works. Forget about your own ego and your first-class travel and your special phone booths and all these things that just make you a laughingstock and your agency a laughingstock. Thank you, Madam Chair. Strong message to follow.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. Administrator Pruitt, this is your time before the committee. We welcome your comments, your review of the budget that we have in front of us. Thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Udall, Vice Chairman Leahy. It is good to be with you this morning. I look forward to the questions and the dialogue this morning. There is consequential and important work being done at the EPA since the beginning of the Trump administration, both in terms of improved environmental outcomes as well as substantial regulatory reform. We are stripping burdensome costs from the American economy at an unprecedented pace, and we are doing this while inspiring confidence in the American people that their government will work with them, not against them, in achieving harmony between economic growth and environmental stewardship. In the short time of the Trump administration, we've made enormous progress as far as improved environmental outcomes. In 2017, we removed over 3 times the number of polluted sites of contaminated communities across the country as compared to the previous administration. And in 2018, we are on pace to remove as many as 10 times the number. With regard to states, we are working with them to improve air quality through the approval and the review of 350 state environmental plans. And with regard to water, we are leading a multi-agency approach to eradicate lead from our drinking water within 10 years, largely through the utilization of a tool that you provided, WIFIA. It is my goal to prioritize applications through the WIFIA process to hopefully see as much as $4 billion a year going to replacement of lead service lines across the country. The President has set a very ambitious agenda with respect to the EPA under his administration, and we are achieving those objectives. The President not only tasked us with the purpose of accomplishing our core mission more efficiently and more effectively than ever before, he also demanded that we approach comprehensive regulatory reform. That transformational change is in fact happening. In just 1 year, the Trump administration has saved the American people approximately $8 billion in regulatory cost. And the EPA alone has saved $1 billion of that $8 billion. These actions are providing America's job creators with the regulatory clarity they deserve. By repealing and replacing the so-called Clean Power Plan, we are ending a one-size-fits-all regulation of energy providers and restoring rule of law. And by rescinding and rewriting the 2015 Waters of the United States rule, we are ending Washington's power grab over land use decisions across the country. It is indisputable that we have made enormous progress in advancing the President's reform agenda, while also at the same time achieving better outcomes for the environment, pruning back decades of regulatory overreach that was unnecessary, burdensome, and ultimately harmful to the hardworking Americans across the country. The important work continues. The Chairman mentioned my appearance just in the last 3 or so weeks before the House Committee. And just in the last 3 weeks, we've done the following. We've issued a proposed rule to strengthen the science used in regulations issued by the EPA. The rule will ensure that the regulatory science underlying agency action is fully transparent and that underlying scientific information is publicly available in a manner sufficient to independently validate the science. We've created a new Office of Continuous Improvement within EPA to implement the Lean Management System, otherwise known as ELMS at the agency. ELMS and the Office of Continuous Improvement will enable the agency for the first time to track important agency actions to ensure we respond and resolve the challenge quickly and thoroughly. Prior to this administration, the EPA was not systematically or regularly tracking key actions such as permitting, meeting legal deadlines, or correcting environmental violations. With ELMS and this new office, all parts of the EPA will set ambitious and achievable targets for their work, measure those results, and improve the processes to bridge the gap between targets and results. We afforded to OMB recently a proposed rule prohibiting consumer and commercial paint stripping uses for methylene chloride, following through on EPA's January 2017 proposal that methylene chloride be banned from products. That happened recently. We have issued a memorandum outlining a back-to-basics agenda for reviewing the National Ambient Air Quality Standards Program under the Clean Air Act to ensure that the EPA and its independent science advisors follow transparent, timely, and efficient processes in reviewing and revising public health and welfare-based NAAQS program. This will bring the EPA and its advisors back on track with Clean Air Act requirements, statutory deadlines, and the issuance of timely implementation rules. Finally, highlighting our commitment to collaborate with the states, tribes, and localities to protect air quality. We've taken the next step in the Clean Air Act process to implement the National Air Quality Standards for ozone from 2015. After designating most of the United States as meeting the standards in November of 17, the agency has now completed nearly all remaining area designations, and we have good news. We now have 10% more counties meeting ozone quality across the country than we did before. I emphasize again that these actions, which will improve the efficiency of the EPA and the lives of countless Americans, are only highlights of the EPA's achievements in the last month alone. President Trump has set a clear and very ambitious agenda for the EPA, and we are focused on getting those results for the American people. And make no mistake, we will achieve those results and serve the American people effectively with our agenda. I look forward to your questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Administrator. I appreciate you outlining the issues that you have undertaken as an agency to work, again, towards the goals that I think we all recognize are the mission set within the EPA, clean air, clean water. You've heard the very direct comments from my ranking member and from the ranking member of the full committee. As I mentioned in my opening, you had an opportunity to field similar criticism in the House hearing just last week or so. That is part of that record. I think we all have had an opportunity to review that. But I would ask you at this point in time if you have anything that you would like to add to that in response to some of the issues that either Senator Udall or Senator Leahy have raised, or if you choose, you may just handle them directly as those questions come from them. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to supplement anything at the outset before I move to the more budget-specific questions that I have.
Yeah, Chairman Murkowski, thank you for the opportunity. And let me say first and foremost, I understand the concern that has been raised by the ranking member as well as Senator Leahy, and in your comments as well, Chairman Murkowski. I knew that as I began this process over 16 months ago to lead this agency, that the issues would be competitive. There are worldviews that drive the decisions that we make at the agency. And over the last several years, we've seen a competition with respect to how we should approach our business. First and foremost, we have had some advance an agenda that true environmentalism, environmental protection is prohibition and not stewardship. And so one of the things that we've tried to focus upon at the agency, and what I've tried to focus upon, is restoring a commitment of recognition that we as a country can be about management of our natural resources, that we can truly feed the world, empower the world, and do so with stewardship principles in mind as we advance the agenda. We've made some very important decisions. Chairman, as you know, with respect to the Pebble Mine situation in Alaska, that was a very controversial decision that was made. We made a decision based upon the data, the science, and the feedback that was provided by citizens in your state, and did what was right there. Recently, as I mentioned in my comments, the methylene chloride decision, that was an Obama-era regulation issued in January of 2017. I recently met with individuals impacted by methylene chloride and made the decision to proceed with that by forwarding it to OMB. We are making the tough decisions with respect to environmental protection while at the same time restoring confidence in the American people that we can engage in regulations and not pick winners and losers and not engage in coercion with our actions. Now, that has brought, I think, competition and criticism. And I understood that from the very beginning. And there have been decisions over the last 16 or so months that as I look back on those decisions, I would not make the same decisions again. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those. But some of the areas of criticism are frankly areas where processes at the agency were not properly instituted to prevent certain abuses from happening. One is an example, the decision with respect to the phone booth. You mentioned the secure phone line. That was a process that there were not proper controls in early to ensure a legal review of the obligation of the agency to inform Congress and GAO. And I started a process shortly after finding out about it that we investigate that and institute those controls to ensure that that does not happen again. We're going to talk about a number of those. And as the leader of the agency, it's my responsibility to take steps. In fact, one of the things I did shortly after the House meeting, Chairman, is institute a memo for the entire agency that any expenditure over $5,000 that impacts my official duties has to be approved by the CFO, the deputy, and the chief of staff, to ensure that all processes are being checked and there are proper controls in place. So I share your concerns about some of these decisions. I want to rectify those going forward. I also want to highlight for you that some of the criticism is unfounded and I think exaggerated, and I think it feeds this division that we've seen around very important issues affecting the environment. We can achieve both good environmental outcomes and pro-growth policies, and it's our commitment, my commitment to achieve that, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you for that, sir. And let me move then to a policy initiative. I mentioned in my opening statement the issue related to the waters of the United States, WOTUS, as we call it around here. I believe very strongly that what we had seen under the previous administration with the interpretation was overly expansive. And again, I mentioned that when you have 2/3 of your state that is considered wetlands, it would have put even the most routine project in my state to EPA scrutiny and delay and possibly no advancement whatsoever. So I have been encouraged by the plans to re-examine the regulation and to come up with a more sensible proposal. So the question for you this morning is, what is the status on that in terms of updating the rule? I've heard rumbles out there that the time frame for completion may be slipping on this. Can you provide me any updates here?
Well, as far as the timing, there are actually 2 or 3 actions that we were engaged in as an agency. There was a proposed withdrawal and a replacement of the WOTUS rule that we've talked about, Chairman, as well as a rule dealing with the compliance dates for the waters of the United States from 2015. So the proposed withdrawal of the Waters of the United States rule from 2015 has not been issued yet. As far as there's a supplemental notice that we're likely going to be providing to the marketplace to provide additional opportunity for comment. But the plan is to actually finalize the proposed withdrawal sometime in the third quarter of this year, and then have a replacement of the Waters of the United States rule by the end of the year as far as the actual finalization of that. I anticipate by the end of this month that we'll actually have a proposed definition, a replacement of the 2015 rule that will go out for a proposal for people to comment upon, and that will begin either late this month or early next month. On that matter, though, Chairman, if I might, for a second, the Waters of the United States rule, the purpose behind it, as far as what we heard in 2015, was to provide certainty. That folks across the country needed clarity on where federal jurisdiction began and ended. And as we look at what happened in 2015, that actually did not occur. There was more uncertainty after the publication of the rule as opposed to certainty. So we have a job to do. The job is to provide that clarity and that certainty to the American people. And it's not just the withdrawal, it's also the replacement that matters there.
Thank you for that. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Pruitt, there's been a deluge of reports about ethical and spending problems in your office. I'd like to give you an opportunity to go on the record confirming or denying some of these reports. In the limited time we have, the public deserves real answers. Do you know how many investigations into your ethics and spending are ongoing as of today?
Well, there are inquiries by the Inspector General, as you know, Ranking Member Udall, and there's interaction with the GAO as well. So as far as the total number, I don't know, but I know that those agencies and those individuals or offices are involved.
By my count, there are 14, including the inquiry I requested today, and I'm confident the GAO will accept. And it's 16 if you include the 2 ongoing reviews by your bosses at the White House and the OMB. And, Madam Chair, I'd ask consent to submit that list for the record.
Does it be included?
Administrator Pruitt, as a former Attorney General, and, you know, you and I share that responsibility. We didn't serve at the same time, but and you're also a law enforcement official at the EPA. Do you support Special Counsel Mueller completing his investigation?
I'm sorry, Ranking Member Udall, investigation into...
Do you support Special Counsel Mueller completing his investigation?
I'm not. I think the process is continuing.
It's a simple yes or no.
I'm aware of.
Yeah. Do you support him completing his investigation?
I don't
You're
know
a
where
law
he's in the
enforcement
process.
official. You've had investigations before. Do you support it?
I think as Attorney General, it's important for law enforcement, those investigators that serve prosecutors, to be able to provide adequate information to them to make informed decisions about whether to proceed as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
I did that as Attorney General, and I would trust that would happen at the federal level as well.
As you know, the right answer is yes. Whenever there's an investigation ongoing, a president or Rudolph Giuliani or anybody else shouldn't be interfering with that investigation, putting time limits on it or anything else, and that's the reality. Yesterday, I haven't asked a question, sir. Yesterday, I requested a GAO inquiry into the April 13th tweet from your EPA's official account, which you mocked Democratic senators for their votes opposing the confirmation of an EPA official. Are you aware appropriations law prohibits federal spending on publicity and propaganda?
Well, I was unaware of the tweet, and that shouldn't have occurred.
You were unaware of it, so
I was unaware of the tweet, and that shouldn't have occurred. There should have been no mocking that took place.
You apologize for it?
The agency should not have done that.
Okay, and you apologize for it?
The agency should not have done that.
What do you apologize to the Democratic senators that you were mocking?
The agency should not have engaged in that process.
And you agree, I guess, that, well, let me go on to the privacy booth. Today marks 1 month since GAO announced that the EPA violated the Anti-Deficiency Act by hiding a $43,000 expenditure on a privacy booth. The law requires agencies to immediately report to the President and Congress on how the violation happened and what you plan to do to fix it. But we have no report in hand. When do you plan to comply with the law by properly reporting this violation, including what EPA plans to do to make sure it doesn't happen again, and to your boss, the President, and the Congress?
As I mentioned to the chairman in the comments I just provided, one of the things that I've learned with respect to this particular process is there were not proper controls in place. And when I say proper controls, there was no legal review that took place contemporaneous to approving the contract on whether notification should occur to Congress or whether it fell within the $5,000 threshold.
But you're,
That was
sir,
not.
You're required now to report it. You were required then. We do not have that report.
That's not my understanding.
As far as I know, the President doesn't have that report. Are you going to report to us?
It's my understanding that Congress has been, in fact, informed about the $43,000 expenditure.
No, you have not issued the report that is required, and tell us how you're going to fix this. So
Well, there's
will
an
you
ongoing
commit
investigation.
today to do that?
There's an ongoing investigation
Will you
internally.
commit today to do that?
To do what, Ranking Member Udall?
Submit the report you're required to submit by law.
Yes, once the information is collected, we will provide that report. It's my understanding we have, in fact, advised Congress about the $43,000 expenditure. Now, if there's additional information that's needed, we will collect that information and get it to Congress.
There is additional information needed because the GAO found you violated the law, and if
Well, that the
they
agency
find you
violated.
violated the law, you are required to make a report to the President and to the Congress. You have not done so. And then all additional expenditures after that are also required to be reported, and we haven't had a report on that either. Let me ask about this behavior with the sirens around town. You know, we've heard of your protective detail. Eric Weiss told the New York Times that when traveling, you wanted to use lights and sirens, which are supposed to be reserved for emergencies, because you often ran late. And he said that 2 weeks after he protested and tried to stop the practice, he was removed from his position. Let's get the record straight. Did your security detail use sirens while you were in the car for non-emergencies? Yes or no?
And let's do this.
Yes or no?
There are policies in place that governs the use of lights. Those policies were followed, to the best of my knowledge, by each of the agents that served me.
Okay, here we go. There have been reports that you encouraged the use of lights and sirens on your motorcade, even though there wasn't an emergency. Is that true?
I don't recall that happening, Ranking Member Udall.
You went
And
shopping?
There are policies,
You
there are
also-
policies that the agency follows, the agents follow, and to my knowledge, they followed it in all instances.
Well, and you personally requested that the sirens and the flashing lights occur, is that right?
I think I've just indicated that the agency has followed those policies to the best of my knowledge. And that's
You
what,
personally requested that on a number of trips.
no, I don't recall that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to submit for the record, Madam Chair, an email that was released this morning by your Pasquale Peretta. He sent an email and he says, by the way, Administrator Pruitt encourages the use. So I'd like to submit that for the record.
That will be included as part of the record.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Let's go to Senator Hyde-Smith.
Chairwoman Murkowski, thank you for convening this important hearing to review the Environmental Protection Agency's fiscal year 2019 budget request. I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve on the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you, Ranking Member Udall, and the distinguished members of this subcommittee on crafting responsible funding legislation that provides adequate resources to the many important agencies and programs under the subcommittee's jurisdiction. Administrator Pruitt, thank you for appearing before the subcommittee today and all your very good leadership as head of the EPA. You have taken a common sense approach to the environmental regulatory process. For that, I am truly grateful, and I have been most impressed. I do have a couple of questions. Over the past year, the EPA has taken many important steps to expedite the cleanup of Mississippi Phosphate Superfund site in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I appreciate you making this a priority, and I certainly commend you for your commitment to ensuring the Superfund program is managed very efficiently and very effectively. This effort will not only benefit the city of Pascagoula and citizens of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but it also protects some of the most productive nurseries for aquatic species that our fishing and recreational communities rely on. The action memorandum that you signed last month calls for $71.6 million in cleanup to take place from 2018 through 2020, plus $36 million for ongoing wastewater treatment during a 3-year period. Mississippi constituents are very encouraged by the EPA's plan for action. Will you please elaborate or share your thoughts on the positive impacts for this Superfund effort you will have on the Mississippi Gulf Coast citizens and ecosystem should the cleanup go as planned?
Senator, thank you for your comments and the question. The mayor actually was in town at the time that we did that, and as you indicated, we added the site to the list in January of 18. I think the Superfund impact, the approach we're taking to making sure that we prioritize action and get results, sometimes from an early remediation perspective, is making a substantial difference. And I think this site is an example of that. It's also exemplary, I think, of how we should be partnering with those at the local level. What we've endeavored to do is work with mayors in the localities of where these sites are located, along with governors, and make sure that our program, both at the federal level, in Washington, but also in the region, are trying to find answers with those partners. And I think, again, this is demonstrative of that.
Does EPA's budget request for fiscal 2019 include adequate resources for EPA to carry out its action memorandum?
Well, I think the omnibus that was just adopted increased Superfund allocation, which is helpful. As you know, there are a series of orphan sites that make up our Superfund portfolio, sites meaning that there's no responsible party. Now, they are the minority of sites, but they are very expensive, and we have to use resources, obviously, of the agency to achieve that. So I think a continued emphasis on funding and the budget with respect to Superfund is very, very important to address those orphan sites. But the other aspect that we're taking, the other approach we're taking, is to get accountability with those responsible parties, to make sure that the companies that have polluted the sites are held accountable and that they actually pay for remediation in a timely fashion. So I think both are very important, both funding from a federal level, but also the accountability through the enforcement process.
Thank you. And also, the previous administrations have made the process of pesticide registrations less predictable. And the sound science that has traditionally supported a risk-based approach to regulating pesticides has given way to politics and emotions. As a former commissioner of agriculture for our state, this is very important to us, that farmers in Mississippi and throughout the Southeast rely heavily on pesticide products to protect the investment they make every year to provide food and fiber to the world. I would like to personally thank you, Mr. Administrator, for visiting Mississippi and several small farms last year in the fall. I further commend your leadership at EPA in resetting the intent for the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act's risk-based approach to regulating pesticides and reestablishing a predictable regulatory process for the registration of these very critical products to farmers and ranchers and everyone else. You've brought true common sense policy to the agency, and I look forward to working more with you in the future as we're enjoying this leadership. I was interested to see your announcement this week establishing the new Office of Continuous Improvement at EPA. Will this new agency-wide effort to improve the time it takes EPA to complete many of its core functions benefit pesticide registration and the overall regulation of important agricultural products?
Yes, I mean, that's actually the focus, Senator, of the Office of Continuous Improvement. There are many statutory deadlines that Congress imposes upon the agency, whether it's an acts review process or the 15-year cycle on pesticides, and routinely those statutory time periods are not complied with, and we didn't even keep track of it before. So whether it's permitting, as I indicated, the time between the violation and enforcement, actually fixing the violation, this issue of statutory deadlines, those are not tracked, nor was there accountability in those areas. So the Office of Continuous Improvement is set up to address each of those, and also to actually establish metrics and objectives. We spent some time last year in the third and fourth quarter talking to each of our program offices and having them identify on airtainment as an example under NACS, what is the objective that they want to achieve on the next 3 to 5 year period, and actually setting those goals in place and tracking those on a daily basis. So I'm very encouraged by that process, and hopeful that it will yield results as we go forward.
And one other is, what are some other key areas under EPA's jurisdiction in which this new office will streamline and improve the regulatory process?
Well, I think I mentioned permitting. I mean, we didn't even track the time period it took to grant or deny permits before we arrived. And we marshaled that data together last year. And I know this will not be terribly surprising to members of the committee, but it takes us a while to get through that permitting process. And we are setting goals and objectives to actually finish that within a certain time period. And by the end of 2018, we will have processes in place to ensure decisions are made within 6 months on the permits that we review.
Very refreshing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Udall, thank you for being here. Administrator Pruitt, I want to talk a little bit about a few parochial issues for me. Last year, you committed to working with Superfund communities in Montana to increase transparency and solicit additional public input. I applaud that. I am glad to hear that EPA and BP ARCO are finally moving forward with the framework agreement to cleaning up Butte, and hopefully can move forward soon with Anaconda. But due to a court order sealing consent decree negotiations, the people in these communities don't know the broad strokes of what the cleanup's going to look like. So the transparency hasn't happened, and the public input hasn't happened. Are you willing to ask the court permission to share at least an overview of the proposed cleanup actions with the public?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. And Senator, if I might, with respect to Butte particularly, I think there, with the January action this year, as you know, there's some delisting that's occurring, and we're making progress, but there's work left to be done.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm encouraged where we are.
One of the key things is that the Butte community and the Anaconda community also, to an extent, have not had input on this. The stuff's been done sealed up, secret, non-transparent at all. For permission to open that up, and you will share it with the public?
Justice would have to do that, so we would have to work through justice to achieve that. But we will make that request. But let me say this as well. We've had people on the ground, as you know, in Butte and other places soliciting and trying to get comments. So we.
Yeah, I got it. But you understand, I mean, this has been going on for a long time in Butte, in the community. And I think you agree by your statements last year. I just want to make sure we follow up and do that. The community needs to have input, so they need to know what's going on. They can give input, but it's like, you know what I mean? You got to know what's going on with the decrees in order to be able to give adequate input on how to move forward. And that's all I'm asking for you.
It's been a point of, absolutely. It's been a point of emphasis in each of these areas that we have focused upon. The community involvement is.
And with that goes the opportunity to potentially listen to that input and change those decrees to meet the needs of the community.
As we negotiate the enforcement, yes.
Okay. The OIG September report, thank you for that. The OIG September report on Superfund staffing issues cited that a lack of even remedial investigations on the West Side Soil Operable Unit in Butte is a prime example of how understaffing can delay efforts for decades. We don't even know if people in water are at risk, but we do know, at least we think we know, that there's arsenic, cadmium, copper, lead, zinc, you know, all the impacts of that. This is a human health and safety issue that's been in place for decades on one of the largest Superfund sites in the nation there in Butte. A site that EPA has recently flagged for immediate intense action, your agency. And yet there's still only one employee on the ground there on the site. And I understand in between him and your regional director, they're working to engage people on the ground to get the ball rolling, but haven't given them any additional resources or staff to get that ball rolling. Now, how are these sites going to get cleaned up? Even high priority sites like Butte, which have real threats to human health and water, if they can't get the resources they need for even basic risk assessment?
Yeah, so we have sent individuals from headquarters here and also the region to engage with Butte. And I made the comment in response to the question just a minute ago. Yeah. I mean, the funding from Congress with respect to Superfund is important. It's something that we want to encourage increasing. I'm thankful that in the omnibus that was increased. But those monies, Senator, largely go toward those orphan sites that don't have a responsible party. So the personnel side of things, we will work with the regions to achieve better coordination to make sure there's an allocation of resources to address these high priority areas. I think what you're referencing is the administrator's list that put Butte on.
Yes.
And so it is absolutely a point of emphasis as far as engagement and getting people on site to help.
I got that, Administrator Pruitt, but it takes more than just putting them on a list.
Understand.
They've got to have the manpower, they've got to have the resources, or it doesn't happen. They get on a list, and that's as far as it goes. And I'm just asking you to make sure that they do have the resources and the manpower. It's because it's not going away unless we deal with it.
I agree.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I don't think Butte is singular in the problem. I think there's 1,700 sites, I believe.
1,340 plus.
1,340 plus.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take your numbers. That have been. Yet the OIG says that the offices are understaffed, and yet we get the proposal that the Superfund budget is being cut. Did I read that wrong in the budget?
The proposed budget actually proposed a cut, yes.
So, I mean, we just had the conversation about evaluation. We just had and
Sometimes I'm not as persuasive as I want to be with OMB.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
I pick up what you're laying down. Okay, thank you. The community of Libya struggled with asbestos, highest rate of asbestos-related diseases. Yeah, go ahead.
But it is important, Senator, with respect to these levels of funding for things like Superfund. I mean, leadership of this program is important.
Yep.
Funding is equally important, and focusing on getting results. And what's happened for a number of years, the reason we have a Butte situation is a lack of awareness, leadership, and accountability to achieve outcomes. So we are committed to making sure that's happening.
There are plenty of things in this EPA under your administration that I could be critical of, trust me. But you have made a commitment to clean up Superfund sites. We happen to have 3 of them in the state of Montana. I just want to make sure that we get on the same page and actually work together to clean those Superfund sites up, because I agree with you on that. And I think it's really, really important. But talk is cheap. And people and resources are important, because these things don't go away unless we spend what we need, whether it's in manpower or whether it's in actual dollars, to get them cleaned up. And so I thank you for that.
Action results matter.
You better believe it. It does. Thank you. I will put the asbestos question for the record because I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator, for being here today. I want to kind of set the scene. You and I have talked about what happened to the state of West Virginia over the last 8 years in Appalachia as a general region. But now our unemployment rate is lower. Our GDP growth is some of the fastest in the country. And I think a lot of that is increased productivity. And though we have a lot of more work to do, I think some of the good work that you are doing to take the regulatory boot off of American workers is certainly appreciated where I live. I want to ask you about the Clean Power Plan. That regulation, I think, had potential, some very downside risk for the state of West Virginia. You did host a public meeting in our state over a 2-day period. I appreciate that. It's the first time the EPA has held an open meeting in our state for a very long time. And I'd like to know, given what I've described as West Virginia's present economic situation, recovering, can you provide us with an update on your plans to replace the Clean Power Plan, and how you intend to incorporate that public input that you've received from different stakeholders?
Well, Senator, we'll approach the public input much like we did with respect to the discussion around the Clean Power Plan. It's important that we hear from stakeholders. We were not only in West Virginia, we were in other places across the country, Wyoming, as I recall, in California as well. And so that process will continue. We actually have an advance notice of proposed rulemaking out in the marketplace, soliciting comment and input on the potential replacement to the Clean Power Plan. So we actually have a 2-step process going on. One is the repeal, rescission of the Clean Power Plan as a proposal, and then also consideration of what replacements would occur. And that will be a rulemaking process. It will be a collaborative process. It will be a stakeholder process where we'll hear from folks across the country on that very issue.
Do you have any idea of what the timing of that might be?
We anticipate that in 2018.
Thank you.
All that occurring in 2018.
Okay.
And I think it's important, it's really, with respect to the Clean Power Plan specifically, with the U.S. Supreme Court stay against the Clean Power Plan, it obviously never went into existence.
Right.
And largely the reason it didn't go into existence is because the agency tried at least twice to regulate these, the GHG under the Section 111 of the Clean Air Act, and it's questionable what authority exists, which is why we're soliciting comment in the marketplace on the extent of our authority.
Thank you for that. As you know, two communities in West Virginia, Parkersburg and Martinsburg, have been particularly impacted by the releases of perfluorinated compounds into the environment. In recent days, there have been press reports that the release of an HHA study into the risks associated and safe maximum exposure limits of these chemicals has been delayed by stakeholder agencies over staff concerns that its findings may pose a public relations challenge or demonstrate that in some cases the federal government has an obligation to assist with remediation. We have a real vested interest in this, and I want to give you, I want to hear your view on this. This is something that, for those of us who are most directly impacted, we've already had a drinking water incident in my hometown that was very devastating several years ago with the chemical release. Could you talk about this, please?
Yes, and Ranking Member Udall, I think this may have been something that you made reference to as well, and so I want to make sure that I provide clarity on this issue with respect to PFOA and PFAS. We actually have a stakeholder meeting, a summit that's occurring next week with over 200 participants, state, federal, interagency focus on addressing both PFOA, PFAS, and Gen X. And as you know, we have a health advisory with respect to PFOA and PFAS, but we don't have an MCL. We don't have, we haven't taken action with respect to 107 under CERCLA, where it would be a hazardous substance that would allow us to go in and require cleanup by responsible parties. So that's something that I am considering we'll discuss at that summit next week with those stakeholders. We need to take more concrete action with respect to PFOA and PFAS. We will have toxicity standards established this summer with respect to Gen X, which is a subsequent iteration of PFOA and PFAS. PFOA and PFAS have not been in the marketplace since the early 2000s, but nonetheless, we need to take concrete steps, perhaps establishing an MCL, perhaps listing it as a hazardous substance under 107, and doing more than just simply having a health advisory with respect to PFOA and PFAS.
So what is your response? And that is good news, and I'm glad that's ongoing. Obviously, that's ongoing in before this press reports came out about this HHS report. What is your response to the question on this report? Will it be published? Will we see it before your stakeholder meeting next week?
Well, again, HHS is a participant in that summit next week, and I was not aware that there have been some holding back of the report. I think it's important to have all information in the marketplace as we evaluate this. What's most important to me is not just studies. I mean, as you know, I think the health advisory is 70 parts per trillion,
right?
Which is a very strong standard. But we need to make sure that if there's an MCL, maximum contaminant limit, or a 107 approach, that it's based on a record. And that's what we would proceed with post the summit next week. So, but as far as information, we need more information, not less. And we need to take concrete action to address these things.
Well, I think you're in a position to really, with your strong statement here today, to encourage this information to come forward to see and then look at it in the larger context of your meeting for next week. And I appreciate the fact that you are trying to reach the scientific limit that would impact any kind of health impacts in our areas, regardless of who has to remediate and what the remediation costs are going to be.
This issue is a little bit like, it's different, but from the Superfund discussion that we just had with Senator Tester, there's been a lot of discussion about PFOA and PFAS for a number of years, but not much action. And there needs to be concrete action taken by the respective agencies to address it. And I think the two most important that we need to evaluate is the setting of an MCL and also a 107 listing under CERCLA to focus on remediation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Senator.
And you're right. In your testimony, you indicated that there were some policy positions that you've taken that have stirred lots of controversy, and I believe that a lot of the positions you've taken are contrary to the mission and mandate of EPA to protect the public health and protect our environment. You take a look at your budget, proposes massive cuts to the Chesapeake Bay program from $73 million a year, which has been a bipartisan commitment, to 1/10 of that amount in your budget. There's no way we can meet the health and environmental protection needs of the Bay with that kind of budget. But this morning, I don't want to focus on those issues because there are sort of a higher duty in a sense. Regardless of our positions on issues, we have a duty to uphold the public trust and protect the taxpayer dollar. You agree with that, don't you?
I do.
And the reality is that there are strong policy differences with lots of agency heads. I disagree with the positions taken by now Secretary Pompeo when he was the director of intelligence. But you are the only agency head, to my knowledge, to have anything close to whether it's 11 ongoing investigations or 16 investigations at the federal level. And so when you responded to Senator Murkowski's question about, giving you an opportunity to respond, and you started by saying, well, you're taking on a lot of these tough issues, and these allegations of violation of public trust are really primarily a response to that. I really don't think you're taking this issue of public trust seriously. Here's my question. With about 11 or 16 pending investigations, whatever it is, there have been reports that you intend to establish a legal defense fund. Is that true?
I understand that that's being set up, yes.
Okay, so you're in the process of setting that up.
It's been set up.
Okay, so I want to make sure that however that works, you're not subject to more allegations or complaints that you're violating public trust. So I have a question.
If I might there,
Yeah.
we've actually worked with GAO. My attorney here, who's done this for a number of years, has worked with GAO to make sure that it's done properly.
Just a couple questions on the trust, what the commitments you can make today. Will all donations to that defense fund be public?
They will be published, yes.
Public.
Pursuant to the requirements of disclosures, yes.
Will you commit today to not accept any donations from lobbyists or corporations that have business before the EPA?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Will you agree not to accept anonymous donations?
Let me clarify something. I don't accept donations. I don't solicit donations.
Okay.
So that's done by attorneys and others.
Let me ask you this. Will you print on the, structure of your legal defense fund, the rules, will you make it clear that you will not accept anonymous donations? The Office of Legal Counsel at the White House, as you know, recommends strongly against any of these legal defense funds having anonymous donations. I'm asking if you'll, as part of the rules of your legal defense fund, you will say that you're not going to accept anonymous donations.
Whatever the discussions with GAO, White House Counsel's Office yields in that regard, we will follow.
So will you accept the recommendation of the White House Office of Legal Counsel with respect to the trust fund?
They already are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you won't be accepting anonymous donations, or the rules won't allow that. Now, what's also troubled me, Mr. Administrator, is this sort of pattern of information that comes to light about violations of the public trust or misuse of taxpayer dollars, and then sort of your finger pointing at others in the agency. It was really their fault. Mr. Udall asked you about a tweet. The tweet was you. Somebody else did it. I understand that. But here's a recent, headline about the large salary increases you gave to some of your top people. Headline, government executive Pruitt and chief of staff personally approved pay raises of up to 72% for top aides. IG finds. It goes on to point out that having denied it at one point in a hearing before Congress, you later had to acknowledge that you signed off on that. My question relates to something that just came up in response to a letter to Senators Carper and Whitehouse with respect to the security detail. Because it's been your position that you were essentially accepting the security that was recommended to you by the folks who are responsible for security, right? That's the position you've taken.
Those decisions are made by career law enforcement officials at the agency.
Okay. Have you seen the response from the IG's office? It's a May.
I have. In fact, I have it right here before me.
Okay. So what it says is that, in fact, you made the request for 24/7 protection on the day you were confirmed as administrator. Is that true?
On page 5 of the report, Senator, it says the decision to provide 24/7 was made by the Office of Criminal Enforcement, OSEF, at the agency.
I'm reading in response to question number 5. It says this is the response from the IG at the EPA.
I'm reading from the same language.
The EPA Office of Criminal Enforcement, Forensics, and Training has informed the OIG that EPA's Protective Service Detail began providing 24/7 coverage of the administrator the first day he arrived at the EPA. The decision was made by the Office of Criminal Enforcement, Forensics, and Training after being informed that Mr. Pruitt recommended 24/7 protection once he was confirmed back in February. Is that true? Did you request it once you were, right when you were
I was
confirmed?
aware of communications taking place. I was not at the agency at the time. I was before confirmation. And the decision to provide 24/7 security was made, as indicated by this report, by law enforcement career officials at the agency.
Yeah, Mr. Pruitt, what this letter says, the plain language of this letter, I read it, was that you requested it, and there have been lots of hearings, as the chairman and ranking member know, in the House and the Senate, where you've been pointing to an August 2017 report, document by the Inspector General, which they make very clear was not a threat assessment, but that it was a report. You've been pointing to that as justification for this increased in this 24/7 security, when in fact it turns out you requested the first day back in February.
You're mixing issues here.
Okay.
The Inspector General investigates threats. The Protective Service Detail provides the threat assessment. And so that's the distinction. And the Protective Service Detail at the agency made the decision about the 24/7 coverage. The Inspector General report you're talking about in August is simply a compilation of threats that existed at the time, where they're investigating the types of threats at that moment.
I'm not confused at all, Mr. Mitchell. The whole argument you made over time is that you have faced all these additional threats, when in fact it turns out, at least according to this IG report, that you made the request for 24/7 security the first day that you were in office. Is that true or not true?
Senator, your time has expired well over, so we will have an opportunity for the second round. Thank you. Senator Daines.
Mr. Pruitt, the EPA budget request reflects your commitment to refocusing EPA on its core mission to protect human health and to protect the environment. Montana is home to the most expansive Superfund sites in the country. I think it was shared earlier in this hearing that Montana has 3 Superfund sites on the national priority list. We actually have 17 Superfund sites on the national priority list. I want to thank you for the work that your EPA has done to make real progress on Montana's sites. It's been a long time coming, and I'm grateful for your heeding my calls to do so. One of our first meetings we had, you talked about refocusing the EPA and starting to get back on a results focus instead of an activity focus, and I thank you for that. But I'll tell you, we've still got a lot of work to do. I want to talk about Anaconda for a moment, which is it's near Butte. People hear a lot about Butte and then the Superfund site there, but I want to talk about Anaconda first. The local leadership and greater community of Anaconda have requested that a health study be conducted to evaluate the lasting impacts of the former smelter, now turned Superfund site. I understand the first steps are underway. My question is, are you working with the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry to seek appropriate public comment of the health study?
Yes, in fact, we're working not only with ATSDR, but also the state of Montana in that regard. And it has been, I think there's been one community listening session, and there are others that are going to occur. But this is very important for this partnership. I mentioned earlier to Senator Capito, I believe, that the local input, the state input, and the federal input should be cohesive in trying to determine the best path forward in these Superfund sites, and I think this is demonstrative of that.
Well, the communities want to be heard, and I've also heard good feedback. We've had folks on the ground that are listening to what the community has to say. My follow-up question, though, is when will the results of that health assessment be made public?
The listening session I show here occurred on May 10th. and it's scheduled to be completed in March of 2019.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I think it's very important that we have a commitment to that date. What about the local Anaconda schools? I know the Anaconda School District and the county have requested soil and dust sampling. Could you provide an update on the EPA's efforts to meet those demands?
Yeah, the ARCO is actually conducting ongoing sampling now through the spring with respect to those school sites, and I think the results will be made available at the end of the school year.
Okay.
As that sampling has occurred, and any additional cleanups will be conducted over the summer to address post the kids leaving school.
So I appreciate your commitments and the diligence regarding the Anaconda site. It's been a long time coming. It's crucial that we put the health of Montanans first in undertaking the site cleanup. And this is very important, we do this with the utmost transparency, and thank you for that. I want to shift gears now and talk about Butte. As you know, ARCO, EPA, and the state and local leadership in Butte reached a conceptual agreement on a consent decree to address future cleanup at the Silver Bow Butte Area Superfund site. This was an important first step toward a long-term remedy. What the residents of Butte want to know is exactly what is in that agreement, and so do I, for that matter. I know that you committed earlier in this hearing that you'd work to lift that court gag order that is currently keeping the agreement in the dark, and I want to thank you for that commitment. But once the gag order is lifted, can I get your assurance that your team will get to Butte quickly to take community input on the details of that agreement?
Yes, and in fact, we've had many members of our team head to Butte, and then in addition with the regional representation as well. But I think, I can't emphasize enough the importance of community stakeholders having a voice in the process. We've got sites all over the country where that process has been revived, and I think there's much optimism with respect to stakeholders having more say at the local level, and so that's something we're definitely committed to, and we'll make sure happens in Butte.
So I'm encouraged by the responses. I'm encouraged by the commitments. Having Montana input and local input on the Superfund cleanup process is absolutely essential. I want to also provide just some feedback from the troops on the ground, Montanans, regarding your Region 8 Administrator, Doug Benevento. He's had a very proactive approach to carrying out the mission of the EPA. He's building relationships with local leaders, and he's working to address the community concerns. There's still a lot of anxiety and concern, because there's still a long path in front of us that we've got to walk. But he's been a pleasure to work with. I look forward to continue doing so with him and with you. And I want to ask you, keep your eyes on Butte and Anaconda, as well as our other Superfund sites on the national priority list, as we make additional headway in bringing these Montana Superfund sites back to clean, productive reuse.
Yeah, Doug is doing a great job. I appreciate those comments. He's working diligently to bring these stakeholders together, and we're seeing results not only in Montana, but across the region as a whole. And we will definitely keep our eye on the ball.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We'll now begin a second round here, and as the senators, both senators from Montana have asked you to keep an eye on Butte and Anaconda, I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on Fairbanks. We've had an opportunity again to speak to the challenges that the Fairbanks North Star Borough has with regards to meeting EPA air quality requirements. I've worked hard to ensure that the borough was eligible to apply for a grant under the Targeted Airshed Grant Program. Was very pleased that we were able to deliver good news with your help to that community for additional resources to help them take actions like a wood stove change-out that can have an impact, a positive impact on the air quality. As you are likely aware, EPA has reclassified Fairbanks as a serious non-attainment air for the fine particulate air pollution, and it requires the state to formulate a plan of attainment no later than December 31. And we've had an opportunity to speak about this issue and the very specific challenges that Fairbanks has at this point, access to alternative energy sources are limited. They don't have natural gas that comes into the community yet. We've been working for years talking about various proposals, everything from trucking to the hopes that we will see the ability to have gas piped. But our reality is that we are very, very limited with the options. And the complex situation is made more complicated because of Fairbanks' geography, sitting in a valley, the low temperatures in the winter, and I need to hear from you again the commitment that you will provide me as well as your team to really work with the communities, work with the borough to address the challenges that they face. Some of them are immovable. You can't change the geography, but we have got to find a way that the residents are able to have cleaner air, but also not the breathing down their neck of a timeline that perhaps might not be attainable. So your comments here.
Yeah, so the designation that you referred to, Chairman, actually provided additional time, and that was important. And we have been working diligently internal to the Air Office at the EPA to address these matters. I think at some point it may just simply require rulemaking to address these standards that have been set previously. And I've actually been engaged in conversations with Bill Wareham and others in the office about steps and alternatives there. But ultimately, we want certainty and clarity, and we want to make sure that the standards that have been set are fair and that they actually achieve what they're supposed to achieve, but also take into consideration the exceptional circumstances that's represented by Fairbanks.
Well, I appreciate that recognition that we have to do more that provides for that level of certainty. As you know, we were able to include additional funding in the 18 omnibus for the Targeted Airshed Grant Program. I would imagine that Fairbanks would apply again, and hopefully they would be considered favorably given the situation there. But I appreciate kind of the multi-pronged approach that you are taking to a very, very serious challenge in this region.
And I think the airshed grants, the targeted grants, I think were $4 million or so. If
Yes,
I
$4 million to Fairbanks.
Both in 17 and I think recently in 18.
Yeah, which helps that community a great deal. Let me again speak to a more parochial issue as it relates to us up north, and this is the diesel generators in our remote villages. In the omnibus bill that we just passed, we included language there that requires EPA to re-examine this regulation related to diesel generators that are used to generate power in our rural Alaskan communities. So many of our communities, unfortunately, are still diesel powered. They don't have access to any kind of a grid. Under this regulation, the generators that are purchased after model year 2014 have to have a diesel particulate filter if they're going to use it as the primary power generator. And the problem is that these filters have an extraordinarily high failure rate, and even simple upgrades can be difficult. That's compounded then with the fact that these upgrades can only be done by specific technicians. These technicians don't exist in these villages, and so it continues to compound and complicate an issue. I know that we've just put this directive in place just about a month ago, so I don't expect it to be complete at this stage, but I do hope that you can provide me with a status on the review, and again, your commitment to helping us find a workable solution for these remote Alaska microgrids in a timely manner. I just received a communication from Tanana Chiefs Conference, which is the tribal organization leadership in the region, and very specific to this point, outlining their very immediate concerns and asking for that level of help.
Well, there's a categorical, as you indicated, prohibition against any monies being used to address or enforce the existing standards. So, I mean, what we're committed to is working with the coalition locally to try to find answers and make sure that we comply with the language from the omnibus bill.
Thank you. Let me turn to Senator Udall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Administrator, Senator Van Hollen asked the question, and he didn't get a yes or no answer, and that's all I'm asking for here. Did you personally, on your first day, ask for 24/7 protection for yourself?
Personally, on the first day, the 24/7 had been determined by the Criminal Enforcement Office to provide. So I did not.
You did not.
I did not direct that.
Well,
I didn't direct that on the first day.
So your answer is no.
My answer is I did not direct that on the first day.
Okay. Well, all the documents dispute that. So.
That Senator, if I may, I mean, if I.
No. There's just the documents dispute that here, and this is a statement, not a question. But my understanding from the reporting on this is that you have never had a security assessment to determine whether 24/7 was required, and that's been reported yesterday in the Washington Post. Now, when we sat in this room together in June of last year, I asked you to confirm that you would respond to all questions, including written correspondence, from both majority and minority members of this subcommittee as quickly as possible. And your answer was, quote, yes, without question. Does that commitment still stand?
Yes.
Now, why then have you still not answered my April 4th letter and my May 9th related to your condo rental here in D.C.?
I'll check.
Will you respond to my two letters?
Senator, I really want to read specifically from the section that you made reference to a minute ago, because it's important that there's clarity around this issue on 24/7. The OIG in the letter to
we have
the
all
Senate,
the documents,
I understand, but
sir.
it's important.
We have all the documents.
That I said the Office of Criminal Enforcement began providing 24/7 coverage, and the decision was made by the Office of Criminal Enforcement. That was done prior to my arrival.
I understand that. I have limited time. We'll put all the documents in the record, and you can make your arguments.
We will include the documents that you are seeking to read, Administrator.
Senator Van Hollen has all the documents. We'll put them all into the record. I have several of them right here. And we thank you, Madam Chair, for that. On this condo, I want to ask you, are you going to respond to my letters? Do you see a conflict of interest in accepting a pretty good housing deal from a lobbyist couple that has business before the EPA?
Senator, the ethics officials at the agency actually have performed 2 ethics reviews saying that the lease terms are consistent